For many South Sudanese, the decades-long civil war in South Sudan has had a drastic impact on our lives. The war not only uprooted many of us from our homeland, but also forced us to adapt to new cultures, customs, and environments. In her new book, I Am My Mother's Wildest Dream, the author Nyajuok Doluony, who is our guest today, joins us to share her story, which is a remarkable life story, and how she overcame many barriers to triumph. So join us for this important discussion and much more, only here on Beyond the Headlines. The world primarily focuses on the war being waged in South Sudan, paying little attention to the diverse and rich stories among the South Sudanese population. Should we as South Sudanese change the narrative or remain silent and let others tell our story? Fortunately, Nyajuok Doluony decided to write her life story in the book, I Am My Mother's Wildest Dream. Thank you for coming on the program. To start off, you were born in Nyajuok County in South Sudan. Do you remember anything about the village where you were born, the village of Thoach?
Yeah, I do. I was lucky enough to have lived with my grandma in the late 90s, right before the Yitan Camp war happened. So I do remember.
And what do you remember about the village life?
I remember the corn maze. I remember having to build a pyramid. They said there was a prophet coming from Low County coming down to Nyajuok. So my family, my county were building a pyramid. I remember learning my ABCs in Nuer at the village. So
wow, that's amazing. That is amazing. And then, once the conflict started in South Sudan in 1984, where did your parents go?
So according to my mother, they left Nyajuok County in 1997, and they went to Yitan refugees camp for refuge, for survival. There was war in the Nyajuok County that a lot of families fled to safety in Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. At that time, they were in Nyajuok. It's our biggest town from the village I came from.
Yes, and then later on, your family moved on to Dima. And in Dima, in your book, you just talked about the challenges that not only you experienced, but the hardships your mother particularly went through. Can you talk about that?
Dima is what I remember. It's where my childhood took place. So anything that I remember about being in Africa mainly tied to Dima. Mm-hmm. And as fun as it was as a child, there was also a lot of memories I remember of the struggles my mom went through, or all the women in that refugees camp. I remember those struggles. Particularly my mother, my mom she had three kids in Dima refugees camp. And at those times, as a refugee child, the rations is not always on time. So when the ration is not on time, as the mother, she had to figure out ways to feed us. And often it resort to either to go collect wood so she can sell those woods little bundle by bundle, or go find something to do in Pendika, which is the nearest marketplace. And often she would walk miles and miles to gather water for restaurants so she could feed us. So
for our viewers who don't know what a ratio is, can you explain what that is?
So yeah, rations is it's the food nutrition that we get from the UN. So being in the hands of UN, of course, when you're refugees, you don't have any land to cultivate. You don't have, jobs. People were illiterate, so there was no work to be found. Rations was pretty much what we survived on. It was a food brought by the UN, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and we get those twice a month. So on the first of each month, we will get our food, and those food are contained of just basic nutrition, really very basic carbohydrates, which is either corn, maize, or wheat. That would be our main starch. We also got some beans for protein. So different type of beans we would receive. We got oil, little cups per person. And then in addition to that, we got salt. So it was up to the family member to pretty much go do something with that and find ways to make it more nutritious or add something like a tomatoes or meat. So you would have to go sell a cup of oil or a cup of maize to go switch it up with something else.
And you mentioned that your mother had 3 of your siblings in Dima refugee camp. So getting the ratio, and we know the ratios are very small in quantity, and for her to feed all of you as a family, as you mentioned, that was quite challenging. So how did she supplement it apart from collecting the wood? What else did she do?
We did a lot of things. It was a survival move. My mother, I remember some of the instances where she would go to Pandika to sell wood, right? Or to go in the morning and she would knock each restaurant and ask them for help. Some of those help would be sweeping tables or, just sweeping the floor in the restaurant. But often she said she would often bring water to the restaurants. And from what she told me, the place was literally almost a mile away, just one way going. And she would go for that mile walking with a 5-gallon of jug, get the water and brought them back to the restaurants. And she would do that 30 gallons. So 30, she would do that back and forth 30 times to fill a jug or fill a container in the restaurants. Mm-hmm. And Eunice, the challenging thing is when my mother told me, I cry because with that many trips back and forth all day, she would get 2.5 birr. 2.5 birr is like 65 cents in America, dollars.
So that's like going 6 times, for a mile distance each
it's crazy. She said it would take all day. Sometimes her feet blisters, it's sweaty, and her shoes is sandals. Sometimes they would rip on her way. But the thing is, she doesn't always get the money. Sometimes the restaurant would say they didn't have the money and they would give her the leftover food. So I remember her bringing those leftover injera from the customers, and my siblings, I would be really excited and fighting over that leftover food. So now, for thinking about it as a grown woman now, I realize she was desperate. She was desperate to resort to that type of things.
And through that process of being in a situation whereby she had no choice, she had to feed her children. What was your father doing?
My dad was alcoholic. He was alcoholic. Everybody knew my family in town because of my dad. He was a happy alcoholic, so he's always talking to everybody in town. Waking up people house to house and want to chat at night. So it was up to my mother to raise us. There's incidences where I see my dad very sober. Like there was a time he came to Addis Ababa because my auntie was here in America, since 1994. So my dad came to America went to Addis Ababa to get money from my auntie. And and he brought us clothes. And at that time we would literally make tea, because we never had tea. And that was the only time we had something of a substance, something that luxurious, like a tea in the morning, or have pasta. But other than that, it was the same thing, eating corn maze and beans over and over.
I know. I think something that I can relate to from your experience is when you talked about how you would like go to the water pump to make sure that you're on time before the water pump shut. Because, I grew up partly in the refugee camp too. So the need for water is so important, especially clean water, And sometimes, like you said, you have to go to, is it Sobat River, and collect water, and that is a distance,
Yeah.
And having to carry the water on your head, and just that whole experience of hardship. It teaches discipline, but also it's very hard. It's a very hard life.
In Ethiopia, it rains all the time. It rains all the time. So even the tap water wasn't always reliable, because there would be a pipe broken somewhere, and all of a sudden one village would not receive water because there is a broken pipe. So we would resort to the mountains if the Sobit River is over flooded and it's dirty water. You know how it is in Ethiopia, it's always red. The soil would be in the water, so you can't drink those. So we would walk to the mountains to gather water. Can you imagine, like we would find these little creeks with water between the rocks, and that's what we would collect and bring home.
Wow, that is something. And you lived that life for 7 years.
Yes.
That is such a long period of time to be in a refugee camp, you know?
Yeah.
And while you're in the refugee camp, were you going to school?
I did. I did. I went to school. I started from free school. When my family brought me from the village, from Nyajuok, my family were already in Dima. So my dad went back and picked me up and my sister. I was about maybe 8, 9 years old. So I started from free school. So I did free school up to 6th grade in Dima refugees camp before my family immigrated to the US.
Mm-hmm. And talk about the immigration process. How did that happen? And what state did you come to when you arrived in the US?
I always, my dad was, even though he was, like the town drunk, he was still a very respected person in our village. When my dad would stop drinking, as soon as he stopped drinking, he would be elected as a chair in the church. So he's always back and forth being the elder of the church, and then he would leave the church again, back and forth. So I don't know how the selection works, but when I talked to my dad, he said they basically offer him the forms. So when the UN brought the forms to Dima, they offered them to the elders first and the teachers and the ones that were holding positions in the camp. So that's how my dad got the forms, because they knew us very well. They know my dad. So that process took literally less than 2 years. It was like a year and a half, from 1997 to 1999, we were in America. When we got to America, that's probably the most funniest part in the book, is that transition coming from a refugees camp to a place like America. We have seen things we've never seen before. So it was funny.
Share one of the funny stories about, because I read the books, so I know some of the stories, but they're quite funny reading it. Can you share just a little sneak peek of the story from, your experience here and the cultural shock you experienced?
I think one of the challenges movement that we had, there was quite a few, but one of them was not knowing what ice cream was. Okay, so we had that. I think it's a 1 gallon tub of ice cream. That big tub of ice cream. It was in our freezer, and my mom thought it was a mix of dough to make walwal. We have walwal as Nuer, and Bianca have walwal too. So she thought it was a dough preparing for us to, we can make our own walwal, and we thought it was. So she put it out just to, because it was too cold. She tasted it was too cold, so she put it out to thaw, and it turned into liquid. So we were very shocked, but there was people in town that my mom called. She called one of our good sponsor that sponsor us as the newer people in town. And he told my mom that he came over and said, it's not a dough. This is ice cream.
I tell you.
We've never seen ice cream before.
Yeah. And that is the same thing. If Americans were to go to Africa, their experience culture shock as well,
Yeah.
So they wouldn't know how to use certain things as well. They have to ask as well. So
it was fun.
Yeah. Oh, that is something. That's something. So after you guys landed in the US, what state did you guys live in?
So when we landed, we landed in New York City.
Okay.
And our home was in Rochester, New York. So that's where, we were in New York City all day at the airport, waiting for our flight to take us to Rochester, New York. So we went to Rochester, New York about in the evening, maybe around 8 to 10 p.m. And it was very short distance, but I remember I was very, very excited that evening for the view of New York City, and I still remember very vividly. It was awesome. It was amazing. Never seen so many lights.
And how old were you when you arrived in the US?
I was about 13 being 14, because we came in the summer, and shortly I turned 14.
So once you guys left Rochester, you went on to Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah.
And that seemed to have been such a drastic change of environment for you and your family.
Yeah, but we're a community of families. We like to be around each other. We like to be around our people. So in Rochester, although there was people, there weren't people we knew. And my dad's sister, my auntie, was in Omaha, Nebraska with her family, and along with people that they knew back home in the refugees camp and back in the villages. So of course they called my family and say, bring your kids here. There's families, there's community. We have a Sudanese community here in Omaha, Nebraska. So we moved to Nebraska, and it was shocking because I got attached to Rochester very fast. My friends, I didn't want to leave them to school. So I had a hard time adjusting to Nebraska, but my cousins were there and I was very excited to see them again because we haven't seen each other since 1994.
Now, when you moved to Nebraska with your family, a man named Ran Chirang approached your father for your hand in marriage, and you're 14 years old. Talk about that experience.
You know, it was happening. It was happening in the whole entire community. It wasn't just me that being arranged at the time. Most of my friends were in arranged marriages.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yep, most of my friends were being arranged. Some of them end up in foster cares because of those arranged marriages. My family, though, I don't blame them because we were new in the country. We were new in the country. They have not been acquainted to the laws yet. And at that time, as a 14-year-old newer girl, I was old enough to be arranged. You know, I was old enough to get married, and they were not aware of how different this country is. It was very different because I wanted to date. I wanted to go to school, and that was a no. So there was a lot of fights in my family.
And I know in our culture is it's like once you hit puberty, then you're ready to produce children, basically. You know?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how old, how mature you are mentally.
No. No, it was difficult, and it's because I feel alone. I didn't have any support system. My family, you know, I was very vocal. As you can tell, I'm a very vocal person. So I was very vocal from the beginning that I didn't want the arranged marriage. I even talked to An Chiereng and I told him I don't want to marry you. But he had arranged, he had plans with my dad. So if anything, I would have to go through my dad for him to go to Ran Chiereng and tell him the marriage is no longer going to be happening. Otherwise, it was not up to me.
Yes, I know in our culture as women and girls, it's like our voice is very secondary, you know? The males are the ones who are much more dominant. And it's very unfortunate because we have so much to give to the society, but yet we're being undermined in every way possible.
Yeah.
It's very unfortunate indeed. But then, you know, can you get further into what happened later on without getting too much detail? Because viewers, we want you to pick up the book and read it because, it is very intriguing, fascinating. I mean, it's very sad as well, but at the end of it, you can see really her growth. And I mean, it's such a remarkable life story of strength and resilience, really, you know? So pick up the book by Nyajuok, and it's titled, I Am a Mother's Wildest Dream. Yeah,
so I, you know, I didn't put everything in the book as you can, you know, you put the things you feel comfortable telling, you know. But one of the things I thought was very important to talk about was how it all went down, you know, how that one particular event in my life went down, especially the switching of marriages or being, I fought not wanting this marriage for almost 2 years, right? Telling my family, I don't want it. And they had already taken the dowry, which was very important because my dad had already went to Africa. He went back to Africa and got married using those dowries. So now I was in a bind it was like my responsibility to not put my father in a situation where he has to give back $8,000. In 2000, $8,000 was a lot, you know? So my cousin recommended something that as a newer woman that I should do, and that was to choose another man, basically to choose another man that was my chosen. And girl, before I can even come and talk to them, they had already called the family of that man. So it went down.
And then you ended up marrying a different man, not Ran. And then that whole marriage ended up producing a beautiful daughter, you know?
And that's where I think that's where psychological abuse happened in my life. It was during that transition, because my family were very mad at me that I didn't want this guy that they chose for me. And that is a sign of disrespectful, right? So I was being disrespectful to my family, to the whole community. And then when they finally acknowledged that, okay, she doesn't want this guy, and then she has this other guy that she said, you know, they talked to, let's have him come and be the husband now, you know, and take over the marriage. But then I got pregnant You know, I got pregnant before the whole situation finished, before the arranged marriage was finished, before the wedding, before they gave me away. So that was like the last straw that just shifted everything in my father's eye and the whole family. So people were fighting left to right. This poor young man was getting beat everywhere he went by my uncles, by my family, and his whole family were getting beat too everywhere they saw them. So it was like we were back in Nyajuok like all over again in my Wood County, because this is how they handle it, right? That's how they handle it back home. So it was
village life in America, you know.
It was happening on Bird Street in Omaha, Nebraska. Every single day they see each other. Wow. And to me, that was traumatic, because it happens in front of me. Every time they see me and him standing, it was a fight. So
and Americans cannot survive in such an environment.
Oh, we didn't survive. We did not.
You cannot survive because there's so much hostility going on.
Yeah, we didn't survive.
And then after that, you went on to pursue your bachelor's degree, and you took your daughter along with you.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I was very lucky in a sense that my parents were here in America. I was very lucky that my mother was here. Okay. At that time, when all of that was happening, there was girls like my age too that were getting pregnant, and they were dropping out of school like flies. You know, they were dropping out of school. Most of those girls didn't come with their family. They didn't come with their mom or dad. They came with uncles or aunties. And of course, you know, being a teenage pregnant girl, it came with a lot of challenges. But my mom was there for me. I had my daughter in 11th grade. I was able to finish school, and I went straight to college, you know. Even though I started at a community college, I ended up going to a university and getting my bachelor. But I would have not done that if my mom was not there with me, because it was a hard work having a baby and being young yourself. But she supported me the whole time.
Mm-hmm. And then what did you get your bachelor's degree in?
I have my bachelor's degree in science in nursing. So BSN. Mm-hmm. Girl, it was hard work, but it was a good degree to get at the end.
Mm-hmm. So once you finished your bachelor's degree, then you decided to go ahead and enter the military. Talk about that.
I get very emotional when I talk about my transition from civilians to military, because it was only one incident that caused all of that shift. I've never thought that I would be in the military wearing boots and carrying weapons and going to war. You know, although I grew up as a refugees girl, not being all fancy and wearing heels and all that stuff, I picked that up very quickly in America. I'm a girly girl. I like to dress up in dresses, wear jewelries. But something happened to my brother. My brother was in the military prior, and he was broken. The war broke him, and my family had to deal with that. And I saw him fight for his life. I saw him wanted to survive, and it's the mental trauma was just so much on him. And for some odd reason, I got interested in joining the military. I think about my brother and think if he had been injured in Iraq, it would have taken a medical personnel like myself to help him survive, to be alive and bring him back to us. And I wanted to do the same thing for somebody else's brother and, you know, somebody else's son. So my choice of going to the military was to honor my brother.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, and that's really commendable. So once you joined the military, where were you based?
I was right here in San Antonio, Texas. You know, here in San Antonio, we have our #1 Department of Defense medical facility treatment here in San Antonio. It's called Brooke Army Medical Center. When I decided to join, I talked to my recruiter and I said, because I did my research, and I said, I'm only joining the military if I get to work at Brooke Army Medical Center. You know what? She did her work, and that was my first duty station. So I moved to San Antonio, and I told my family that I gotta, because, you know, of course, my mom would never want me to join the military, knowing what had happened to my brother after he came back from Iraq. So we kept it a secret from them for 2 years, my brother and I. I was a junior in college, and I told my brother that I would join the military, and he did not. He tried to talk me out of it, but of course, we kept the secret, and told my family that I was gonna move to Texas and work for the government, but they didn't know what type of government work. So
it was hush, hush, hush.
It was hush, hush. They did not know for almost a year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And then you ended up being stationed outside of the country, you know? You almost went through the same challenges that your brother went through, you know?
Yeah, so we don't call that station. We call that, it's a deployment. You know, a station would be if I get to go to Germany, or I get to go live in Italy or somewhere in Japan for a year or two, which is a safe place, right? It just a destination location. But my time in Iraq was a deployment. A deployment is a combat zone. I was in combat zone for nearly a year, and it was challenging. It was lonely. It was dangerous. But it was a part of being in the military that you always want to experience. You know, I volunteer for that. I volunteer for it. And during that time, I kicked myself. Why did I do this to myself? But I'm grateful that I did. I'm grateful I did, because I would still wish that I had done it if I didn't get a chance to do it.
And what was the experience like in terms of, you know, because you talked about how that was a combat zone. What impact did that environment have on you?
Well, I'll tell you an example how it impacted me. When I came back from Afghanistan, first time I came back, I came to a leadership position at Fort Riley, Kansas. I was stationed in Kansas. And I went to this nursing meeting. It's a nurse executive meeting where all the head nurses, you know, come together and talked about what happened last week and what's the next plan going forward in the nursing departments. And I was sitting there, and one of the women in the meeting phone rang, and her phone alarm, her ringtone was exactly the same ringtone I used to hear in Afghanistan when we're having rockets come through. When we have a rockets, there's this big post, loud noise that come through our post, and they say incoming, 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 meaning you better hide, like hide, and everybody knows what that means. And it's like boo, 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 that noise. So that was her alarm. I tell you, I jumped out of that table. I ran outside to hide, and everybody was shocked what was going on. And I came back because I realized soon that I'm in America. I'm in America, I'm safe. That was just a ringtone. I came to her, I was very anxious. I was nearly in tears because it was embarrassing. And yeah, I yelled at her and I said, change your effing ringtone.
Yeah, that is traumatic. It's triggering.
Yeah.
It's very triggering, you know?
Yeah, so it's internal, you know. It's been 8 years now since I came back. It's getting easier and easier, but every now and then I sleep, and they come back in my sleep. So
yeah, and that is the post-traumatic stress disorder, whereby, you know, it's a lot of us South Sudanese suffer from that, from the trauma we've experienced, you know. Even though we might not have been directly impacted by the conflict that is going on in South Sudan, still the incidents reverberate throughout all of our communities.
Yeah, post-traumatic stress disorder, you don't have to be the one facing it. You could just hear it from somebody.
Yeah.
You know, and if you hear it or see it, or you know, it's still the same. It's same stress. You can experience it the same.
Yeah. All these stories that we keep hearing again and again from family members. I mean, yeah, it's very traumatic.
Yes,
and then, you know, during that time period, you ended up meeting someone special, you know? Yeah, talk about that.
I met Makuru. Yeah, I actually met him right before I deployed to Afghanistan. And our first entire year, we built our relationship while deployed. I left 3 months later. I left for Afghanistan beginning of 2013, and 3 months later, he left for Djibouti. He's also, you know, he's still active duty. He was active duty at the time. So when he went to Djibouti, our time differences kind of almost line up, you know, as far as time zone. So we were able to communicate more. We built our relationship from during deployment, and we came back and got engaged.
And then later on, you got married.
Got married and have 2 boys. So. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's good. Yes, and if people want to find out more, please go ahead and pick up this book by Nyajuok. It is I Am My Mother's Wildest Dreams. So as we conclude the interview, what would you like let's go on and talk to our young boys, our men, our uncles, our brothers. What would you like them to take out from reading your book?
I think my books speak for itself. It's a story of story of hardship, a story of trauma. It's a story of just life, having life happen. Life happened to all of us. It's not always good or bad. It's just roller coaster, right? That's what's going to happen when you read the book. It's you're gonna find really good moments. You're going to be excited, and then you're going to be sad, and you're going to want to punch somebody in the book. But at the end of the day, it's a story of hope. It's a story of resilience. It's a story of faith. And I want everybody to know that it's what you're going through right now, or where you come from. It's not your final destination.
And what would you like our girls and our women, our aunts to take out from reading your book?
I want them to, they're going to relate with my book. They're going to relate with it. And I want them to know that it's their life is not over. And I want them to speak up. It's really about speaking up for themselves. Our young men cannot help us if we don't tell them what we need help with. We need to tell them this culture of where we see our women as less, it needs to stop. It needs to stop. And they can tell with my life that the things I have accomplished it's pretty remarkable. And I'm a newer woman, so we need to give our young girls a chance. So I want all the young girls to know that their own life matters, their dreams matters. Don't let anybody subject you to just being a mother and being a wife. There's nothing wrong with that if that's your choice, but that's not all you can be. You could be anything you want. You can be anything you want, and that is the honest truth. I always, the dowry that my family received from my marriage, I can pay that. I can pay that over and over if that's what they wanted. You know what I mean? But it was a hell of a fight. And for young men that are coming up, don't subject your sister to that. Don't subject your nieces to that. It's nonsense. If they want to go to school, let them go to school. If they say they don't want this old man, let them not want the old man. Let them bring up the guys they want.
Yes, and now you're just a true testament of what a South Sudanese woman can accomplish when given the opportunity. Even the hardships that you endured, you accomplished. But just imagine those barriers had not been placed, how much further along you would have been in your journey,
I have no idea, girl. I don't know. My mom always thinks that I am so determined and successful because of what I went through, right? She believes what I went through propelled me to be here. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
Yeah, you could take it both ways, but also, of course, that with studies, they show that when you grow up in an environment that is healthy, whereby you're being encouraged, you're much more less likely to endure a lot of mental turmoil and torturing yourself. Should I do this? Should I not? Because you'll be focusing more on goals and accomplishing goals. But yet your life is such a true testament of what we as South Sudanese women can do when we are determined and we see our potential in all opportunities. So thank you so much for writing the book. And where can our viewers actually get a copy of your book and read it?
So it's available on Amazon all over the world. Amazon.com, Amazon.au, wherever your nearest Amazon website is, you can find it. Just search for I Am My Mother's Wildest Dream. And it's also on my personal website. Mm-hmm. So if anybody goes to www.iamnyajuok.com, they can go on the shop section and shop for the book. So iamnyajuok.com or on Amazon, and they'll get it instantly. Currently it's digital, so it would be downloaded to your phone, your computer, but soon we're working on the hard copy and maybe even audio version.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's great. So thank you so much, Nyajuok, for joining us here on Beyond the Headlines. Thank you for all that you're doing for the community, because I know apart from writing the book, you're doing a lot more. And of course, you're the founder of Ross Girls Breaking the Silence. Let's not forget to mention that. So thank you so much for joining us here on Beyond the Headlines.
Well, thank you so much, Eunice. I appreciate you. I appreciate you so much for all that you do for our country. I look up to you. So
now I look up to you.
Yeah, I'm proud of you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube page at Sunrise Media.